Hi, this is Patrick. In this video I'm going to show you how to create the virtual tour assignment using the Bootstrap framework in Dreamweaver. Bootstrap framework, as we learned in the last module, is a responsive design framework that allows you to create responsive design websites. You don't even have to use Dreamweaver to leverage and use Bootstrap, but Dreamweaver does allow you and makes it easier to kind of integrate it into your website. So this video is really for beginners, but we're going to focus on transforming this old virtual tour assignment that's not responsive. You'll notice that it's got a fixed width to something closer to like this using the Bootstrap framework. So when you're new to Bootstrap specifically in Dreamweaver, I think that it's sometimes easier to start by creating a new site. So rather than using your own site in Dreamweaver, creating a new one. So the first thing I'm going to do in this example is create a folder on my desktop called vtour. Then in Dreamweaver, I'm going to create a new site. And choose that local folder on my desktop. And I'm not going to worry about the server information right now. I'm then going to create a new file, HTML. I'm going to use the Bootstrap framework. I'm going to create new. I'm going to make sure I don't have the pre-built selected. I'm going to select create. And I'm going to save this as start.html. So I can tell Bootstrap's set up because I can see the Bootstrap CSS. Notice that it's a read-only file, and then there's a couple of JavaScript files. So I want my own CSS to add some of my own elements. So I'm going to go to File, New, CSS, and create a new CSS file. I'm going to save it vtour. I'm going to save it in my CSS folder. I'm going to close it. But now I need to actually attach it. So if you remember, I go to Tools, CSS, Attach Style Sheet. There it is, I can see it, so everything looks right. I'm going to do a quick save. So now I'm going to put my cursor down here, about line 14, I can see it even has some commented text that says body code goes here. I'm going to give some space, and I'm going to go over to the Insert panel, and I'm going to make sure I have Bootstrap selected. And I have two options for container. I tend to like the fixed width kind of perspective, whereas the container fluid goes across the whole screen. So I'm going to select that. I can see that down here. I'm going to give some space. And I got to make sure, I can just really clean this up, make sure that in between my opening and closing div tag, my container tag, that I keep everything else I do. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add navigation. Now, if you go to the Insert panel, you can find navigation. If you scroll down, there's this option here for a basic nav bar. But you see it gives options like a search, drop down. It just gives a number of things that I don't think most people need, or at least beginning for this site. So for this project, if you just Google Bootstrap nav bar, you'll find the Bootstrap website, and you scroll down, you can find a real basic nav bar right here that I think is pretty easy to work with. Paste that in there, and you can see it looks across. That's that one disabled. If you go down here, if you just get rid of that disabled word on the class, it looks just fine. And if the word disabled bothers you, you can add something like that. If you want to add, for instance, an extra page or an extra link to the navigation, you just copy that list item and just like that. So now after this, I'm going to make some space after this closing tag. And now I want to actually add a grid row. So the way that Bootstrap works is it works on these grid rows that have columns in it. And so you can have lots of different ones, for instance, 3 equal columns, or one big column in the middle, 2 small on the left and right. You can do something like this. So right from here, if you put your cursor here, if you go over, you'll find grid row with column. And so when I click on that, I can choose how many columns to add in that row. I'm just going to do 2. And you can see that when I did this, it's above the nav, right? And that's not really what I wanted to do. So I'm going to go back And I'm going to clean up my code and make sure I do this in the right place. So here's the closing nav tag. I want to be after that. I'm going to add that grid row. I'm going to go with 2 columns. Okay, that looks good. I have the left and the right. And so I can even sit here and add a, we'll say an H2. I'll say left. I'll do the same thing. I'll add a heading for right. And this just visually helps me kind of see what's happening here. So then I find that closing div tag for my container, which is line 32. I add some more space. And I'm going to actually add some space around this row because I've decided maybe I want to add a header tag. I'm going to add an H1 there. And maybe I want to add a footer tag. So you can do this and you can see it starts to have that same framework or structure that we used before. You don't have to use these HTML5 kind of structure tags, semantic markup that we've been working on, but I think it's kind of helpful to get back in that framework of we have a nav tag, we have a header tag, instead of a section or something like that, which you could still use section and article and aside tags, but you use one of these grid rows and then you have a footer tag. I'm going to save this. So then I'm going to go back to my header and I'm going to actually add an image in there. So I'm going to get rid of that header text. And if I go over here, I will notice that I have some options for image. Right here it says responsive image. And notice a number of these have these drop downs. So I'm going to hit default. And it does this placeholder. And that's fine for now. I'm just going to do a file save. And when I save it, it's going to create an images folder for me and add this responsive placeholder image. But it's more that it creates an image folder for me, which is helpful. So then I'm going to find an image that I want for my header. In this case, I know what I want. I want this image of Italy. And you could have a different one for each page. And that probably would be even better. But for this example, I'm just going to have one. So if I click back on this, if I go down here to this folder, I can change that image and okay, add some alt text. That looks good. And if I wanted to, I could go back. Now that I don't need that placeholder, I could delete that. So the other thing I like to do is I like to sometimes add some dummy text. So if I go over here, I just Googled dummy text. I've shown you guys this before. And just do 2 paragraphs. And this helps me just start to, when I'm mocking things up, to see what things look like. Do that again. Notice how I accidentally got some div tags in there. That's where you got to be careful not to delete things. And maybe this one I want a little shorter. Okay, so far looks pretty good. So now that I have the basic layout, I want to do a bunch of save alls to basically update my navigation, create a page for each of these. So I'm basically going to be trying to recreate this. And so if I look up here, one of the first things I notice that the home it's basically a bold or it's a black where these others aren't until I hover over them. So it's basically giving this feature that shows you which page you're on. So much the same way this one's orange. And so when you change, you can tell which page is active. So if I look over here, if I go to the navigation, we could first find nav bar up here. And this is where I could say, and if I wanted to, I could make that an actual link. I could actually get rid of that if I didn't want it, but I'll just make it start. So then if I go down to home, you got to slowly work your way through this. Change that to start, and I change this to start.html. So then we're going to continue to change each of these to match some of these. So I'm just going to go, features will become Venice. I'm going to decide that I'm going to call this page Venice. This next one, Pisa. Florence, we'll do Florence first. Do Rome. And I'm going to add one more to have Naples. Okay, so now once that looks good, I'm going to go back up here. I'm going to check out Start. I'm going to get rid of this active. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy because I'm going to reuse that. But for now, I'm going to get rid of the active so they all look the same. So now I'm going to do a save, and I'm going to save as to create each new page. Venice. Pisa. Florence. Rome. Naples. So then once that looks right, I'm going to go back to Start. I'm going to start working my way through, and I'm going to change the class for each current page to the current one. So now that's Start. That looks good. I'm going to go to Venice. And you got to be careful when you're doing this, that you don't mess things up. Okay, then I'm going to go to Pisa. And you might find copying and pasting doesn't work as well as just retyping it. Florence. Rome. So there I got a double quotation mark. Naples. Okay, the other thing I would do is I'd go back through and I would just add a little reminder of the page. I'd also go up here to the title. Sometimes if you work down here in the properties inspector or whatever, it gets weird. I'm going to save and I'm going to move on. I'm going to basically redo this same steps for each of these. I'm going to add basically text to remind me as the main heading what it is, and then I'm going to add a title to the page. Save and then repeat. I find this methodical approach when I do this, the same thing for each page, helps me make sure everything, think of repetition, consistency, good design. I'm going to save all, and then I'm going to preview. And for me, you can definitely preview right in Dreamweaver. I'm pulling that out accidentally. But I often like to just go to my web browser, take a look. And even before I do this, I can look in my file here and I can see that basically I have an images folder with my CSS, with my image of Italy. I have a CSS folder with a couple CSS files, the JavaScript folder, and then I have all of my HTML files. So basically that's looking right. So even before I go to preview, I can see that everything's there that I want to be. So now if I look at this, you can see the navigation looks right. I'm on the start page, start, and I can start checking to see that my navigation works. Venice, 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 Pisa, Pisa, Florence, Florence, Rome, Rome, Napoli's, Napoli's. Then I can check that the actual responsive design works right. Navigation, that looks good. And there are other things you could do to adjust with media queries if you wanted to, but for beginning, I think this is a lot of what you need. And so then the question becomes, what are the next steps? You basically have the basic layout set up. So this is where you could really start to just experiment with adding a little CSS. You would add your content, of course, so you could go with each heading and start adjusting it. And so I might add a about the tour there. I might add over here Italian flag. I might decide Italian national anthem, that I want something down here. And of course, your content's different and it might look very different. Then the question becomes, well, how do you start adding your own styles to this? And so, oops. If I just look at this example, I can start thinking about, okay, well, let's look at the virtual tour CSS. So maybe I want to add something for the body tag. And so maybe I want to do background, color, and you can see it, the way that is, that doesn't look real great when you think of contrast. But if I then go, well, what about the container? Then you might want to do some things with maybe the H1 is around the image, so I'm not going to do anything to that, but maybe the H2 I want to do some stuff with, and my H3. I could change the font, change the size, change the color, change the padding. I can do all of those types of things. And so in this example here, I'm going to just take the same body background color, and I'm going to say and then maybe I want to do something with font size. Now, there's different ways to do things. Bootstrap, I believe, uses the rim kind of, so I can see what that looks like. And so 1.5, well, maybe that's not exactly what I want. Maybe I want more 1.8. And that looks about right. And if you want to adjust it, you could. And then I think in this example, I use just a kind of a darker gray as my H3. But here, maybe I want more differentiation between my two headings. So and maybe that's not the exact gray I want. I want something a little. And you can keep playing with it till it's exactly what you want. So, but this gives you some basics here. If I look over here at this example, if I view the page source and I view the CSS, you can see I don't have a lot here. Added some stuff for a class for my attribution, added some stuff for my footer. We can do that real quick. But like attribution, made this smaller. I could even, rather than blue, if I wanted to, make it even smaller and gray. You could go through, and I'm still building this example out, but you get the idea. So here, the last thing here was footer. So maybe I want to add something, a footer. My standard footer is text align, center, and maybe font size smaller. Click over here, apply source formatting, and clean that up. Save all, and then let's go look. So there you see it. There's still so much, right? Besides adding all the content, adding the images, make sure that you use responsive, attribution, playing with media, because with Dreamweaver, especially with Bootstrap, there are lots of things you have to pay attention. There's, for instance, a responsive video embed, so it won't bleed over, responsive images. There's all these other things from buttons to you name it. You can also go down here under snippets and find a lot of Bootstrap components that you can drag over. But as far as everything that I want here, let's go view. I have the basic framework, so now I can really add my content. And you can see that similar to this original one, it just has a little different color scheme, but it's responsive, so any device will work. And if I click on each one of these pages, you can see how my styles transferred. So here I might want to go further and add a different image on each page. I might want to add a title, whether I did that in Photoshop or whether I just added some HTML, CSS to have it be on top of the image. I could do that. There's lots of different things you could do, but hopefully this gives you a basic overview of how you can use Dreamweaver and Bootstrap to create a responsive design website. Thanks.